One of my favorite little bonuses in Otome games is when they let us experience more than one heroine. Now, don't get me wrong, I absolutely love Otome games with a single heroine too. Having one heroine doesn't make the experience any less special, and it's definitely not something every Otome game needs. But whenever an Otome game lets us play as multiple heroines, it always gets me excited because it's such a nice addition and a refreshing way to experience the same world. Instead of seeing everything through only one perspective, we get to explore another side of that world. A different lifestyle, a different personality, a completely different romance dynamic. And there's just something about experiencing those different vibes within the same universe that makes the whole game feel so much richer. It's almost like watching an anime where you get to follow couple A's story and then also discover couple B's story too, all within the same world. But the fun part is, in Otome games, these different heroines and their allies can become the main focus of their own stories. And I absolutely love that. But maybe some of you are wondering, why is the heroine such an important part of Otome games? For anyone who is new to this genre, Otome games are a very specific subgenre of visual novels. The word otome means maiden or young woman in Japanese. And one of the core elements of an Otome game is that we experience the story through the perspective of a female protagonist, the heroine, as she builds romantic relationships with the male allies. That is why the heroine is such an important part of what makes an Otome game an Otome game. The heroine is the character we follow. She's the person whose journey we experience, whose choices we make, and whose relationships we build throughout the story. Because of that, most Otome games usually focus on one main heroine, one perspective, and one journey. And that's exactly why I find multiple heroines so interesting, because suddenly we get another window into the same world. There actually aren't that many Otome games that do this, but after digging through different sources like VNDB and searching for more titles, I found some really interesting ones that let us experience more than one heroine. So, if you ever wondered which Otome games allow us to explore multiple heroines, this video is for you. For the first game I'm going to introduce, which I'm really excited to play, is Le Grande Odalis's Reveil. Okay, I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong, okay? Le Grande Odalis's Reveil is an Otome game set in Anatolia, a fictional empire that once ruled over countries across both the East and West. And I gotta say, I love the Arabian and Middle Eastern inspired setting in this game. I really want to see more settings like this in Otome games, please. But what makes this game especially exciting for me is just how distinct these two heroines are. So here, we get to play as two different heroines. First, we have Ellie, who comes from an aristocratic family and dreams of attending the military academy. She has short hair, a really cute appearance, and even her voice sounds so sweet and girly. But contrary to what you might expect from her appearance, she's actually much more assertive and unrestrained. And she even wants to join the military, and I love that contrast. Then we have Alexia, who is a princess, and her design gives off a completely different feeling from Ellie. With her blondie hair and elegant appearance, she has a much more European princess-like look. But at the same time, she gives off this sense that she is sharp, intelligent, and very sensible. She's also known for her beauty, almost like a goddess, and I have to agree, she really does look like one. I also really like how different their body types and character designs are, because it makes them feel like genuinely different characters rather than just two versions of the same heroine. And of course, the romance stories are going to hit different too. Ellie can romance Aslan, the crown prince, and Dietrich, a descendant of German nobility who has known Ellie since childhood. Meanwhile, Alexia can romance Selim, another crown prince who has had a weak constitution since birth, making it seem unlikely that he will ever ascend to the throne like Aslan, which I'm really curious to see what his story is going to be about. And her other love interest is Farouk, a young soldier from the military academy. So just looking at the heroines and their allies here, we can already see how different each couple's dynamic and story could be. And by the way, Ellie and Alexia are actually best friends. So we don't just get to play as both of them separately, we also get to see them interact and experience their friendship with each other. I will leave the game still side down below in the description, so definitely check it out if you're interested. And speaking of two heroines, what if instead of two completely different girls, we get to experience the stories of two sisters? And that's exactly what we get in Handsome Laundering by Minlib. This game features two protagonists with two different groups of love interests, with each heroine having her own main story. And what's even more interesting is that the game continues the story from the drama series serving as a prequel, Episode 0. The story takes place in the heart of the city where you'll find a popular laundry cafe called L&L Cafe Space. And there's a rumor surrounding this place that they take on secret requests and grant the wishes of those in trouble. So after a certain incident, our two heroines find themselves knocking on the door of L&L, and together with the quirky staff who gather there, they set out to solve different cases. What I'm most interested in is the fact that we get to play as both sisters, meaning we get to experience both of their love stories, and I think that is such a fun setup. The first heroine we can choose to play as is the younger sister, Amachika Misuzu, who is 22 years old. She's a newly appointed teacher at the prestigious private Asanagi Academy, and originally from a remote island, she has this bright and responsible personality. And apparently, romance hasn't exactly been going well for her either. The bad for her. When we play as Misuzu, we can romance Makio, Zen, Ruka, and Chikaya, who are apparently called the Team Cats. I don't actually know why they're called the Team Cats. Some of the allies do kind of look like cats, so maybe that's where it comes from. Okay, now let's move on to the older sister, Ayano, who's 26 years old. And I have to say, I really like that we get to play as heroines in their 20s here. And just as a little side note, if you've ever wondered why a lot of Otome game heroines tend to be quite young, that's partly because the word Otome means maiden or young woman in Japanese. Anyway, back to Ayano. She works as a corporate pharmacist in a research position at Tsukishiro Pharmaceutical. Although she's also from the same remote island, she left home at a young age and now lives in the city. And she's pretty much the opposite of Misuzu. While Misuzu is bright and cheerful, Ayano is much more cautious in everything she does. She's also a little shy when it comes to romance. So I think it's really interesting that these sisters have such different personalities and seemingly very different experiences with romance. I'm really curious to see how those differences affect the way they approach their relationships and how their stories might contrast with each other. So for Ayano, we get a completely different group of allies called Team Bird, connecting of Hayato, Shun, Yosiya, and Tomoe. For the next game, this one actually let us play as not 2, but 4 different heroines. And this one is Hanakare, also known as Him, Smile, and Bloom. It's a refreshingly adult otome that follows the lives of 4 couples, all centered around a local flower shop called Phil Flower. And I remember being so excited when I first discovered this game because all 4 heroines look so different from each other and have completely different vibes. But what's also interesting is that unlike Handsome Laundering and other multiple heroine otome games where each heroine has her own group of allies, here each heroine already has her own specific love interests. So it's more like we're following 4 different love stories, one couple at a time. And their stories actually happen in order. So let's start with the first heroine. We have Serena, who's 26 and works at the flower shop Phil Flower. She is caring and reliable, has a strong love for flowers, and really puts her heart into her work. She's also the one who becomes the mentor to Wataru, who joins the shop as a part-timer. And she's a little timid when it comes to romance, which I actually really like because of how that plays into her relationships with Wataru, who's younger than her. And by the way, she's actually one of my favorite heroines in this game. Then we have Ami, who's 23 and works at an interior design firm. She's strong-willed and a little clumsy sometimes, but she's also a really hardworking person who puts her whole heart into everything she does. When she first started working, she was inspired by this flower shop guy she met, and she really looked up to him. And yes, that guy is Gin. And I'll be honest, Ami didn't really click with me that much because of some things about how she approaches relationships, but thankfully, her story doesn't drag on for too long, and by the end, I was happy to see them work things out. Next, we have Fuka, who's also 23 and works at a major trading company. I haven't played her story yet, but from what I've read, she's one of Phil Flower's most frequent customers. She is bright, lively, and really good at charming people. She's basically the ace of her workplace, but she's also been carrying an unrequited love for her older childhood friend, Hokuto, who's been living next door to her for years. And honestly, I can kind of guess where the story is going, but I'm still really curious to see how Hokuto eventually falls for her and how their relationship develops. And finally, we have Miko, who's 24 and works at a botanical garden. She is kind and gentle and tends to put other people before herself. Back in high school, she was the class president, but she wasn't particularly good at socializing, so she tended to keep a little distance from everyone around her. Her love interest is Tenya, and I've actually heard that their story is one of the favorites among players, so I'm really looking forward to playing his route. Unfortunately, we don't really get that kind of interaction between the heroines, which is such a big shame and missed opportunity, to be honest. But overall, Hanakares is a pretty short game, which makes sense since it was adapted from the drama series. So if you're interested in a slice of life, low-stakes romance with adult heroines and 4 completely different love stories, I would definitely recommend picking this one up on sale. Okay, so we've gone from 2 heroines to 4 heroines. But what if a heroine who already exists in the base game gets her own separate story arc? And that's exactly what we get with Goddess of Tears Restoration. I've actually talked about this game in one of my previous videos, so if you've seen that one, you might already know about the base game. But what I didn't mention back then is that aside from the main story, this remake also includes a Katarina arc, where we get to play as Katarina herself from the very beginning. And yes, she will also be getting her own English release in January 2027, while the base game is scheduled to release in October 2026, which is so soon. Okay, in the base game, we play as Philia, the current holy maiden of this world. She is a saint who was raised without knowing that she was actually a special being. Despite her delicate appearance, she has such a strong will. She is pure, adorable, and honestly, I just really love her after getting to know her in the demo. As Philia, we can romance Giselle, Salinus, Will, Darius, Girol, and Fran. But then we have Katarina, and this is where things get really interesting because we actually meet Katarina in the base game too. Before Philia appeared, Katarina was supposed to marry Giselle as a candidate for sainthood. So when Philia enters the picture, Katarina initially sees her as an enemy. But as the two of them spend more time together, Katarina slowly starts showing her true kind side toward Philia. And I really love their relationship. From what I've seen in the demo, Katarina has this very Cinderella-like personality where she says the opposite of what she's actually feeling. And at first, she often tries to bully Philia a little. But Philia's reaction is just so funny because it basically makes Katarina go like, "Why are you reacting like that? You're supposed to react this way." And that just makes Katarina even more confused. eventually, they end up having tea together and actually become friends, which I just find so cute. I usually don't really like tsundere heroines, but Katarina is actually an exception for me because she's not genuinely mean or rude. She's just really shy when it comes to expressing herself, I guess. And I genuinely love seeing how these two girls slowly become friends and find support in each other. Just a little trigger warning here, if you're sensitive to darker themes involving trauma or sexual violence, definitely be careful with Katarina's arc, because personally, after seeing that little preview, I don't think I'll be picking up Katarina's arc. But if you do play as Katarina, she gets to romance Salinos, who's actually Katarina's older biological brother. So yes, they are blood related. And if that's something that makes you uncomfortable, definitely keep that in mind. Shade is another love interest who can only be romanced in Katarina's arc, while Giselle is also one of her romance options. This game is currently only available on PC, so I will leave the official site down below as well if you're interested in checking it out. If we're talking about Otome games with multiple heroines, Nor9 will always come to mind. The story takes place a little in the future, where a young elementary school boy named Sorata is suddenly warped through a time skip into an unfamiliar world that looks almost like the Meiji and Taisho eras from his textbooks. There, he meets 3 young women and 9 young men, who are all supposedly espers with special powers and are traveling aboard an airship under the mysterious multinational organization known as The World. And from there, we get to uncover the mysteries surrounding the airship, why it was attacked, and the stories of its occupants through the perspectives of each of the 3 heroines. And honestly, I only read through the synopsis while working on this video. I've always known about Nor9, but I never actually knew what the story was about. And now that I'm reading more about it, I was like, okay, this actually sounds really interesting, because yes, in this game, we get to play as 3 different heroines, and each one has her own group of allies. First, we have Koharu. She is a polite and cheerful young woman who has the ability to control fire. She's actually the most powerful esper in her group, but she goes out of her way to hide that fact from everyone else. And if you choose Koharu as your protagonist, you can romance Senri, Masamune, and Kakeru. Then we have Mikoto. She is beautiful, mature, and comes from a wealthy family. She's responsible and dependable, but apparently she can also be pretty bossy. Okay, so we have an Ojo-sama heroine here. I've actually never played an Otome with this kind of heroine before, so I'm really curious about her. Because I can't even imagine what the romance dynamics are going to be like with a heroine like this. I feel like not every ally is going to work with this kind of personality, which honestly makes me even more curious to see who actually suits her. If you choose Mikoto, her romance options are Itsuki, Sakuya, and Natsuhiko. And then we have Nanami. She is a young girl with this fragile, almost doll-like appearance, but she's actually incredibly capable because she was born into a ninja clan. She's also really good at erasing her presence and rarely express her feelings, which makes her pretty difficult to read. Very much giving me that quiet, kudere, mysterious heroine vibe. And if you choose Nanami, you can romance Ron, Heishi, and Akito. And honestly, I love how different these 3 heroines are. And the more I read about their individual powers and backstories, the more curious I get. I started this section knowing almost nothing about Nor9, and now the more I read, the more I want to know what happened to these girls and how their stories connect to everything happening on that airship. So yeah, Nor9 is definitely staying on my wishlist. And if you've actually played this game, please tell me more about it down below, because I would genuinely love to hear what you think about the 3 heroines and their stories. Different heroines are one thing, but what if they were suddenly thrown into each other's worlds? Now, that's different. And that's exactly what happens in Shiro Tokuro no Aris. This game has one of the most interesting premises I've come across while looking for multiple-heroine Otome games. In this world, there are actually two different worlds, the world of white and the world of black. Our first heroine is Hereee, a second-year high school student living a peaceful life in the world of white. One day, on her way home, she meets a mysterious young man named Rain who asks her, or honestly, basically forces her, to become the queen of another world. And that brings us to the world of black, because while Hereee is living her normal high school life, a sudden coup d'etat takes place in the kingdom ruled by our second heroine, Luna. Luna is the current queen of the world of black, and when the coup happens, her advisors Rain, the black rabbit, and Snow, the white rabbit, come up with a plan to protect her. And that plan involves swapping the two heroines. So Luna is sent to the world of white, where she has to live as a normal high school girl. Meanwhile, Hereee is brought to the world of black and has to take Luna's place as a queen. And I just love the idea of this, because these two girls are just living different lives. They're literally being thrown into each other's worlds without really knowing what the other girl's life is like. From what I've read on VNDB, Hereee is portrayed as a kind and timid girl who has always been surrounded by her family and friends. Meanwhile, Luna is much more confident and has that tsundere personality. She's also very competitive, hates losing, and has a strong sense of responsibility, which makes a lot of sense considering she's the queen. So once again, we're getting two heroines who feel really different from each other. And just like Nor9, each heroine also has her own group of 3 romanceable allies. The more I read about this game, the more curious I get. So yeah, another one going straight to my wishlist. Now we're getting into Tlikoliti Eyes. In this game, we get to play as 3 sisters, the Tochi sisters, who all share the same unusual ability. In this world, people with magical powers are known as ability users, and many of them have become popular in the entertainment industry because their abilities can temporarily enhance other people's traits, things like strength, eyesight, charm, and so on. Sounds pretty convenient, right? Well, there's a catch. Their ability can also trigger something called Tlikoliti, which causes the man affected by it to become completely infatuated with them. And on top of that, this is also a romantic comedy with love triangles and even trippy roots, so if you're into that kind of trope, yeah, you might want to keep an eye on this one. So let's meet the 3 sisters. First, we have the older sister, Aoi, who's 26. She's a talent manager with a firm personality and strong sense of responsibility. She's currently managing a temporary unit called Gemini, which consists of twin idol brothers, Ko and Yu. And I have to say, this is going to be interesting because both of these allies are considerably younger than Aoi, and there seems to be some rivalry between the brothers over their manager. So yeah, we're getting a little Ani Shota romance here, with 2 brothers fighting over the same women. Okay, that's already kind of spicy. Then we have the second sister, Natsume. She's a reserved and timid girl who works as a rookie photographer. She's a little shy around people and apparently has a hard time refusing other people's requests. She's currently working as her senior Yosuke's assistant, but because of certain circumstances, she ends up living with Wataru. And I'm honestly pretty curious about her story. There's just something about watching a shy and timid heroine navigate romance that makes me wonder how she's going to fall in love and how she will handle all these different personalities around her. And then finally, we have the youngest sister, Sakura. She's an optimistic and honest girl who's a newcomer actress at the Iris agency. After participating in a film shoot with a friend, she suddenly gets scouted as the leading actress. And her romance options are Chihiro, an actor, and Masato, the president of the entertainment company. But honestly, what really caught my attention while researching this game wasn't even the basic character descriptions. It was this guy's personalities in their normal mode versus their tlikoliti mode. Because apparently, the tlikoliti effect doesn't just make them fall in love. It can completely change the way they act. For example, Yosuke is described as a hardliner X overprotective type in his normal mode. But in tlikoliti mode, he becomes carnivore X possessive. Carnivore? What does that even mean? Is he going to eat us? Okay. And then there's Masato. Normally, he's this older brother as a meddlesome type. But in tlikoliti mode, he becomes worshipping ex-romanticist. And I'm just like, what? Worshipping? Like this? Okay, I'm not gonna lie. I'm actually intrigued. I've heard about tlikoliti eyes before, but this is actually my first time looking into the characters and their personalities in more detail. And if you're curious too, you should definitely check out the other allies' personality descriptions on VNDB because some of them are honestly wild. Okay, this was not supposed to happen. I came here to introduce the game and somehow I ended up putting it on my wishlist though. I swear, every time I research these games for this video, my wishlist just keeps getting longer. Okay, we've seen an Otome with a 3P route. So let's switch gears for a second and go for something much more innocent. We need to clean our brains a little, okay? And for that, we have Junisai Honto no Kimochi and Junisai Koisuru Diary. This series is all about first love, you know, that age when you're going through puberty and suddenly you start realizing, wait, so is this what having a crush feels like? And that's basically what Junisai is about. It's just a really cute story about first love, and honestly, I think it's adorable. I didn't really take the romance that seriously because, well, they're 12. I just see them as this adorable kids who are slowly figuring out what love even means for the first time. I actually discovered the anime when I was still at preteen. So when I found out that it also had games, I was like, wait, they made a game too? And yes, in these games, we can actually play as two different heroines, Yui and Hanabi. And they each have their own specific love interests. Hanabi has Yuto, while Yui has Kazuma. And I think what's really cute about these two couples is that their stories are all about those tiny little moments that suddenly make your heart flutter. You know, when you're still figuring out what having feelings for someone actually means, and suddenly something as simple as spending time together, getting a little compliment, or having a small romantic moment feels like a huge deal. It's that really innocent kind of romance where you're not thinking about complicated relationship dynamics yet. You're just, wait, why is my heart beating so fast? And I think that's what makes Junisai so adorable. Part of the reason this series gives me so much nostalgia is because it reminds me of Tsukide Suzuki-kun, which was one of my favorite manga when I was a teenager. So seeing this kind of innocent childhood romance again really hits that nostalgic spot for me. And it actually makes me wish that Tsukide Suzuki-kun had gotten an Otome game exactly like this. Well, technically, it does have a game, but it's not really the kind of Otome experience I was hoping for. And since we're already talking about it, let's move on to that game. Tsukide Suzuki-kun Myongin no Suzuki-kun is actually based on the Tsukide Suzuki-kun manga, and we can choose to play as either Chihiro or Sayaka. And yes, just like in the manga, they each have their own love story. Sayaka's love interest is Suzuki Hikaru, while Chihiro's love interest is Shinobu. The game is still set when they're in middle school, so we're basically getting to experience these two couples during their younger years. And their romance dynamics are actually pretty different from each other. Hikaru and Sayaka have more of that cute, innocent first love dynamic, while Chihiro and Shinobu start off much more like an enemies to lovers relationship, with a little bit of tsundere energy from Shinobu. And personally, I love Chihiro and Shinobu's dynamic more because I think the relationship has a lot more depth to it. So having these two very different couples in one game is actually sounds pretty exciting, right? Well, there's a little problem. The game actually follows an original side story that doesn't happen in the manga. Basically, the main cast visits a vacation villa during summer break and ends up encountering two other Suzukis. So it's more like an extra story for fans who simply want more content with these characters. And I'm a little disappointed because honestly, if they had adapted the original manga storyline or even incorporated some of the major relationship developments, I think this could have been much more exciting Otome game. And let me just say this, back when I was reading the manga, I actually liked the second couple more. I was always waiting for Chihiro and Shinobu's scenes. So when I found out that the game doesn't really focus on the original storyline, I was like, no! Why? Like, you had the perfect opportunity. I would have loved to experience Chihiro and Shinobu's relationships as the main focus, get more moments from their perspective, and maybe even see scenes that we never got to experience in the manga. That's what I would have wanted from an Otome adaptation. And instead, we got a vacation villa side story. Okay. That's just my personal fan rage coming out. I'm sure if you're already a fan of Sekide Suzuki-kun, getting an extra story with these characters can still be fun. But personally, I just can't help but feel like this adaptation could have done so much more with the romance because I wanted to play their story. Okay, after all that fan rage, let's move on to something a little different. We've talked about games where we can play as 2, 3, or even 4 heroines. But this time, we're getting 3 sisters who each get to be the main heroine of their own game. And that's the Queen Rose Cinderella series. Each game focuses on one of the 3 sisters, and each heroine has her own group of 5 love interests. So let's start with the first game, Juniji no Kane to Cinderella. Here, we play as Odette, the only daughter of the influential Scarlet family. She grows up comfortably with her father, stepmother, and 2 stepsisters until everything suddenly falls apart when her father dies and leaves behind a huge amount of debt. The family is forced to leave their estate and move into the poorer part of the city, where they have to work hard just to get by and eventually rebuild the Scarlet household. So yeah, Odette is basically our Cinderella, except of course this is an Otome game, so we're getting romance, mystery, and a whole lot more than just waiting for a prince to show up. Then we have the second game, Nijuyonji no Kane to Cinderella, where we play as Rosalia, Odette's warm and impulsive stepsister. Her story starts with the same major event, but Rosalia's story starts taking a more mysterious turn when she discovers 2 strange documents. One bears the emblem of the royal family, while the other carries the emblem of the Scarlet family. And part of her story involves uncovering what these documents actually mean. And honestly, when I first looked at Rosalia, I immediately thought, oh, she's giving me Gisela. Not because she's actually like the Cinderella stepsister from the original story, because apparently Rosalia is actually warm and impulsive, but purely because of her design. So I guess this is our much nicer version of Gisela. And then we have the final game, Reiji no Kane to Cinderella, where we play as Elise. After her stepfather's death and the discovery of his enormous debt, Elise returns to the life she had before her father's remarriage. But then she has a dream from her childhood, and that dream forces her to confront a part of her past that she had been trying to avoid. And honestly, this one gives me the strongest Anastasia vibes, mostly because I remember Anastasia being associated with the dream in the original Cinderella story, so that's immediately where my brain went. But what I really love about this whole series is that these aren't just 3 heroines sharing the same setting. Each sister gets to become the main character of her own story with her own romance options and her own side of the family mystery to uncover. And because all 3 stories revolve around the same family and their downfall, you gradually get to see this Cinderella-inspired world from completely different perspectives. There's no simple evil stepmother and evil stepsister situations here either. They're actually a family, dealing with the consequences of their father's death and the mystery surrounding the Scarlet family. after three sisters in the Queen Rose Cinderella series and all these other multiple heroine Otome games, I just realized something. There are so many multiple heroine Otome games making the heroine sisters, and apparently we're doing it again with Hokago Colorful Stout. This time, we're playing as the Kohinata twin sisters, Natsuko and Haruko. The game takes place at Tokiwa Private High School, where club activities are a pretty big deal. In fact, this school has a rule that every student has to join a club, which is basically just like my high school back then. And since the twins are transfer students, they have the entire month of April to figure out which club they want to join. And I actually think this is such a cute and simple setup, especially because the sisters are pretty much complete opposites. First, we have Natsuko, who is bright, energetic, and loves being active, so naturally she's drawn toward the sports club. She eventually narrows her choices down to the track and field club and the basketball club, where she'll meet the guys who become her romance options. Then we have her twin sister, Haruko, and she's pretty much the complete opposite of Natsuko. She is quiet, reserved, and not particularly good at sports, so she's more interested in the cultural clubs. Her choices are the drama club and the instrument club, where she'll also meet her own group of love interests. And I actually like how naturally the game uses their personalities to lead them toward completely different parts of school life. We're not just getting two heroines who happen to be in the same game. We're getting to experience the same school and same month of club hunting through two completely different girls. From what I've seen, this is also a pretty short and light-hearted game, so if you're looking for something casual, youthful, and just fun to play, Hokago Colorful Stout might be worth checking out. And yeah, after all the family drama, mysteries, supernatural powers, and complicated romances we've been through, maybe we just need some good old-fashioned high school club activities. We've been talking about different heroines this whole time, but what if we could actually shape one heroine into a completely different person? And that's exactly what makes Ayakashi Gohan so interesting to me. Now, technically, this game only has one heroine, Akane Rin. But when Rin is still a child, the choices we make can actually shape what kind of person she becomes in the future. And I really love this concept because it basically shows how our experiences and the choices we make can shape our personality as we grow up. So if you choose to have young Rin behave more shyly and avoid getting involved with other people, she'll grow up to become a timid and reserved heroine. She doesn't like getting too involved with others, and she doesn't really enjoy eating with other people. But if you choose to have her behave more honestly and openly as a child, she'll grow up to become a bright and outgoing heroine who can start a conversation with pretty much anyone. And this Rin is also constantly hungry. She's always thinking about what she's going to cook or eat next, loves cooking, and most importantly, loves eating with other people. So yeah, these two versions of Rin are basically complete opposites. And what's even more interesting is that her personality determines which story arc you'll experience. The more timid Rin goes into the human arc, where she attends school and gradually learns the joy of sharing meals and spending time with others. Her romance options are Uta, the sharp-tongued Komainu, Haginosuke, the son of a Shinto shrine who also isn't fond of eating with others, and Suo, the mysterious Nekomata. Meanwhile, the more outgoing Rin enters the Ayakashi arc, where she helps out at Gin Shop and get to know more about the Ayakashi world. Her romance options are Yumi, Uta's twin brother who apparently hates humans, Asagi, the mischievous one who loves bothering people, and Manansu, the local store owner. But honestly, what really draws me to this game isn't even just the romance. It's the whole theme of togetherness. The idea of learning to enjoy a meal with other people, slowly opening yourself up, and finding a place where you belong. I don't know, it just gives me this really warm and wholesome feeling, and I love stories like that. Even in anime, I really enjoy when food isn't just food, but becomes a way for people to connect with each other. And from what I've read, I also feel like Ayakashi Gohan has a deeper story underneath all that warmth, which honestly makes me even more curious. I haven't played yet, but this is definitely one to experience for myself. We've had our wholesome food and found family moment. Now, let's take a very sharp turn, because the next game is Dare ni Demo Uraga Aru, an R18 Otome game where, once again, we get to play as two sisters. This time, we have Nanako and Momoe. The two sisters have completely different personalities, but they're actually very close and have a good relationship with each other. One day, Momoe starts working as a teacher at the same school Nanako attends, and that's where the sisters encounter 6 male characters, each with their own, let's just say, interesting personalities and circumstances. As the story progresses, both sisters gradually become attracted to some of the men they encounter. And what's really interesting about this game is that it has 2 different heroine routes, depending on which sister you play as. If you play as Nanako, you're the student, so you're getting more of that typical high school Otome dynamic. But if you play as Momoe, you are the teacher. So instead of being the student surrounded by handsome guys, you're the teacher dealing with a very different kind of romantic situation. And I think that's what makes this setup pretty interesting, because we're not just switching between 2 sisters with different personalities, we're also switching between 2 completely different positions within the same school. And because Nanako and Momoe are sisters who live together and attend or work at the same school, we actually get to see them interact with each other throughout the story, which I really like. And here's another thing that makes this game different from most of the Multiple-Heroine games we've talked about. Usually, each heroine gets her own specific group of love interests, but here, both sisters can romance most of the same allies. So you basically have the same cast of characters, but the romance can play out differently depending on which sister you're playing as. Now obviously, this is an R18 game, so this one is definitely not for everyone, but purely from the multiple heroine concept, yeah, I can see why this one stood out to me. After that very questionable R18 setup, let's go back to something a little more old school. And this time, we're going back to a game that I barely see anyone talk about anymore. Fantastic Fortune 2. There's actually an older Fantastic Fortune game that also features 3 heroines, but it's much older than this one. So for this video, I'm just going to focus on the second game. Fantastic Fortune 2 is a love simulation game featuring 3 heroines, Marine, Aqua, and Aoi. You choose one of these girls and follow her through a 7-month training period as she works toward becoming the Star Maiden. During the weekdays, you'll attend classes and build up your character's different parameters, and when the weekend comes around, apparently, you're off to hunt for man. I don't know why the description literally makes it sound like we're going on a hunting expedition, but okay. You can spend your free time interacting with different characters, choosing who you want to fall in love with, making friends with other girls, or simply working toward your goal of becoming a Star Maiden. So it's not really just a straightforward Otome game, it's more of a love simulation mixed with character training and stat management, which, yeah, sounds pretty interesting. The only problem is, I barely found anything about this game. I didn't really see people talking about Fantastic Fortune or even Fantastic Fortune 2, and there's surprisingly little information available about the game compared to some of the other titles we've talked about. So I don't have a whole lot more to say about it, but hey, I just wanted to let you know that this game exists. 3 heroines, 7-month training period, stat building, romance, friendship, and apparently manhunting on the weekends. Yeah, I think that's already enough to make you curious. Okay, let's leave the whole becoming a Star Maiden thing behind for a second, because this next game is basically pure shoujo manga romance with one very specific rule. All the love interests are gentlemen, and that's Junsei Yasaotoko. The game gives us 2 heroines to choose from, and you can experience their stories in 2 different school settings, sweet and bitter. And what's really interesting is that you actually get some control over what kind of heroine you want to play. So in the suite setting, you can choose to make your heroine more active and playful, like teasing the allies or even taking the initiative and chasing after them. But in the bitter setting, well, you can go for a much more mischievous or even manipulative and antagonistic heroine. So basically, you can decide how you want your heroine to behave instead of being locked into one personality. And I actually think that's a really fun feature, especially if you're someone who likes having more control over the heroine's personality. But if you don't want to choose all of that yourself, that's totally fine too. You can simply pick no at the beginning and let the story play without customizing those options. So there's actually quite a bit of freedom in how you want to experience these little stories. And speaking of little, this game is really short. It's an omnibus-style visual novel with each route taking around 15 minutes, and it's actually free to play. So this definitely isn't something I would recommend if you're looking for a long, complicated Otome experience. But if you want something quick, cute, and a very sojo rom-com, this could be a fun little game to try. And apparently, you can also choose which kind of scenes you don't want to see, so there's quite a bit of control over your experience. I'll link the game's website down below if you're curious because they have more details about all of these options. For a free 15-minute Otome, the amount of control they give you over the heroine is actually pretty neat. Okay, for the next one, I actually never imagined that this was a hidden Otome game, and I'm talking about the Imagine series. I genuinely had no idea. I mean, just look at these covers. This is the English version, and this is the Japanese version. The difference is way too huge, and if nobody told me these were Otome games, how was I supposed to know? I actually found out about this because someone mentioned it in my video about Otome games with gameplay, and I was like, wait, you can date guys in this? So yes, apparently, even the Imagine series has multiple heroines, and you can actually romance characters along the way. Let's start with Imagine Ballet Star. The game lets you choose between 3 heroines, Keira, Naomi, and Swan. And in the Japanese version, there's also a 4th heroine, Margaret. Each girl has her own personality and specialty in ballet, so obviously the main focus is still on their dancing career and becoming a ballet star. But yes, there's a romance too. So apparently, while you're busy trying to become the next ballet sensation, you can also find yourself falling in love. And the same thing applies to Imagine Figure Skater. Here, you can choose between 3 different girls, Amber, Cindy, and Jessica. Now, this game is where things get very confusing, because from what I've read from people who have actually played it, apparently the girls' names, personalities, and even their family relationships aren't fixed. For example, if you play as Jessica, Cindy might have a brother named Kevin. But then, if you play the game as Amber, suddenly Jessica is Kevin's sister instead. And it gets even weirder because apparently the girls' names can change too. So if you're playing as Jessica, Amber might be called Isabel. Then you play as Amber, and suddenly she's Amber again. So basically, all of these girls will be Isabel. We just don't know which one until we start playing. And apparently, even their personalities can change. One player mentioned that when they played as Jessica, Amber or Isabel was a little sassy, but when they played as Amber, was suddenly the timid one. So even their personalities aren't sad. I'm sorry, but what is going on? This identity crisis is killing me. I genuinely don't understand why they couldn't just keep the names and personalities consistent. Wouldn't that make everything so much easier? And then there's the romance. Apparently the game starts in April, but the romance doesn't really kick in until around June, and all 3 heroines ends up falling for the same guy, Tobias. He's initially very quiet, and the idea seems to be that the heroine and Tobias help each other come out of their shells and grow together, which honestly sounds pretty cute. But apparently, because the heroines essentially have the same personality regardless of which one you choose, there's not much replay value in the romance itself. So yeah, Imagine Figure Skater might be one of the strangest multiple heroine setups I've come across so far. At this point, I started this section thinking, oh, cute, ballet and figure skating Otome games. And I ended up wondering, who is this about? Why does everyone keep changing? Honestly, I kind of want to play it just to experience this chaos for myself. And if you actually play it, please tell me what your experience was like, because I need to know if this is as confusing as it sounds. And I think that's pretty much all the multiple heroine Otome games I could find on my radar. Honestly, even though this video took me more effort than usual, I'm really happy I made it because I ended up discovering so many games with interesting premises that I'm now genuinely curious to play myself. I even put some of them on my wishlist, so that is always a good sign. And while multiple heroines definitely aren't something an Otome game needs to have, I think they're such a nice bonus when they're done well. They can make the world feel richer and give us completely different perspectives and romance dynamics to experience. And after researching all of these games, the three I'm most curious to play are Le Grande Odalis, Nor 9, and Ayakashi Gohan. Le Grande Odalis is because I love how different each heroine setting and romance dynamics are. Nor 9 because the more I learned about the heroines and their powers, the more curious I became about their stories. And Ayakashi Gohan because I love the idea of your childhood choices shaping what kind of heroine you become later on. So yeah, those three definitely went straight onto my I need to play this list. But now I'm curious about you. Which multiple heroine Otome game interests you the most here? And which heroine are you most excited to play as? And if you've played any of this, please share your experience down below because I genuinely want to know more. And if you haven't seen my previous video about Otome games with actual gameplay, I will leave that one here as well. For now, I hope you find your next Otome gem, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye!